Before you step into Arizona's Superstition Mountains, know this. Authorities say 4 to 5 people vanish or die here every single year, but incident reports and survivor accounts repeat the same details. Hidden doors carved in stone, a glyph-etched iron rod, and encounters with the unknown. This episode will expose a documented pattern. Are these incidents random, or is this region actively guarded? And it begins on the afternoon of March 12th, 2000. A woman named Angie drove her car along the dusty roads leading to the Superstition Mountains, just outside of Phoenix. She had decided to drive out to see if she could find some interesting stones to add to her collection. The Superstition Mountains are a massive range that rises over 6,200 feet, and they're known for incredible rock formations and dramatic canyons. But they're also extremely dangerous and have a very dark reputation because, for generations, people have told stories about strange things happening on the mountaintops and deep in the valleys. But because she was a practical person, she wasn't thinking about any of that as she parked her car and began her ascent on one of the easier trails. As she walked along and enjoyed the scenery, she would occasionally bend down to examine interesting stones that she spotted along the path. But she wasn't really finding anything worth taking home, so she decided to go further. Soon, she found herself climbing higher and higher uphill, trying to make the most of this trip. Eventually, she was walking near the edge of a canyon, and something caught her eye. She noticed this sparkling object in the sunlight. It was off the trail, situated near the canyon's edge, and it looked beautiful. Perplexed and curious, she carefully made her way over to investigate, and when she got close, she couldn't believe what she was looking at. Right there, a massive piece of white quartz was glowing in the sunlight, just begging to be taken. So she gets down on her knees next to this, and as you can imagine, she's amazed. But the only problem is that it's way too big for her to carry all the way back to her car. But she's determined not to leave empty-handed, and the next thought is that she needs to chip off a piece of this quartz. But no matter what she's doing, it's not working, and she's getting tired. She decides to take a break just for a couple of seconds though, and as she does this, she notices something else. She quickly stands up to catch her breath and just so happens to catch movement across the canyon on the opposite side. Maybe 100 feet away, there's what looks like a cave, or more like a shallow depression in the face of the rock with an overhang that's casting extra shade. For whatever reason, she felt drawn to this other side, and so she stopped working on the quartz and decided to head over for a better look. As she makes her way around the edge, being extremely careful, she becomes increasingly excited, and she thinks that maybe there'll be some native artifacts in there. But as she gets closer, she's disappointed. As she suspected, there's not really much of a cave. In fact, it's just what she thought, a shallow depression. So she decided to use the opportunity to sit down and take a few sips of water and reassess what she wanted to do at this point. As she's taking a break and she's lost in thought, her eyes kind of just wander and she notices something shining on the ground nearby. Now, she doesn't feel like the trip over here was pointless, that there might be another interesting rock, or perhaps a piece of metal, or even an artifact she can take back. As she adjusts her body to stand up, she suddenly feels something on her shoulder, kind of like a cramp, but only seconds later, she realizes that's not what it is, that something had grabbed her shoulder. You know, when you hear a story like Angie's, where a simple hike turned into a complete nightmare, it reminds me of something a lot less dramatic, but still stressful, trying to deal with my own health when I kept putting off making an appointment. For me, it wasn't fear of reptilian overlord creatures wanting to extract my soul, it was the hassle of calling around, not knowing which doctor I could actually trust or if they'd even be in network. As I've gotten older and wanting to take my health more seriously, I finally hit that point where I realized I couldn't keep putting it off. I needed to see a doctor, and the old way of hunting one down just wasn't working. That's when I found today's video sponsor, ZocDoc, and honestly, It made everything so much easier. ZocDoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors. Choose the right one for your needs and click to instantly book an appointment. From mental health to dentistry, eye care, skin care, and everything in between. ZocDoc makes it easy to book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers. With ZocDoc, you can filter for doctors by insurance, location, and specialties, and see reviews by verified patients so you can choose the best, most convenient care for you. When you found the doctor you need, you can see their actual appointment openings, choose a time that works for you, and instantly book a visit with just a few clicks. Plus, ZocDoc helps you get appointments fast, typically with just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and you could even score same-day appointments. No need to call doctor's offices and wait on hold either. ZocDoc lets you do everything online. Stop waiting, stop guessing, and don't keep putting it off like I did. Go to ZocDoc.com/beneath, and I'll leave it right there at the top of the description, and find and instantly book a top-rated in-network doctor today. That something had grabbed her shoulder, a hand, and whoever it belonged to felt scaly as if they were claws. Out of reaction, she turned around to see who it was, but what she saw changed her entire reality in an instant. Although she didn't have much time to take it all in, this wasn't a person. As all of this is happening, she sees another flash of something glinting in the sunlight, and then everything goes black. The next thing she knows, she's waking up and she has no idea how much time has passed, but she was somewhere else. She can make out that she was in some room, one she'd never seen before, and she would later describe it as maybe 15 feet across, but the walls seemed to curve up into the ceiling, and there were domes on the ceiling that gave off a soft, almost indirect light. Along the walls were instrument panels with lights flashing in patterns she had never seen. The next terrifying thing that she realized was that she couldn't move and she was on her back on some table. Her entire body was covered in this thick, gelatinous substance that hardened around her. She was completely immobilized. Now remember that all of this happened over the course of a few seconds. Suddenly, she hears these sounds. She couldn't quite put a finger on it because they sounded so strange. She described them as a combination of barking and chirping noises, and they had a distinct pattern to them. After a moment or two of listening to this, she realized that it sounded like language. And during this time, her eyes had been adjusting to the dim lighting, and she was able to see she wasn't alone. Multiple figures were moving around this room, and they were clearly not human. But they did resemble whatever had grabbed her shoulder. As her eyes continuously adjusted to the lighting, she could see them more clearly, and she's disgusted. Most of them have this green, scaly skin, which instantly reminded her of the flash before she lost consciousness. It was the flash of scales. They also had these yellow eyes with vertical pupils. They all differed in size. Some had narrower, smoother faces, others were broader and flatter. All of them, though, had these small, rounded ears set high on their heads with no earlobes, and each had 3 distinct ridges on top of their cone-shaped heads. She described that some of these had wide mouths with strange skin folds, others had smaller mouths, and that their scales were this khaki green. Even stranger was what they were wearing. These weird, wide ribbons or gray scarves draped over their shoulders. Underneath that, they appeared to be wearing what looked like a uniform, kind of like a white jumpsuit, each one bearing an insignia on its chest, a 7-pointed star with a dragon curved around it. A 7-pointed star is known as the fairy star or elven star, representing mystical realms, a connection to the fae, spiritual gateways, and magic. But it can also represent a wide array of other concepts depending on the religion or belief. Among all of these reptilian-looking beings, there was one that was significantly taller, estimated by Angie to be about 7 feet, and was white instead of green. Unlike the others, the uniform was orange and had different emblems. One was a black inverted triangle, one was that star and dragon, and there was a third one that was an oval shape with stars in it. On the cuff of its left sleeve, it had these 3 upside-down triangles with 3 lines cutting across them. As she's taking this all in, they're moving closer to her, examining her. All the while, they continued making these strange barking and chirping sounds. And then the white one approaches her, holding some device like a box in its hand, and it places this against her head, and immediately she describes this incredibly strange calm wash over her. She's still very terrified, but now it's as if her body no longer responds to the fear, like she's physically disconnected from what's happening. As she's lying there unable to move or speak, she notices there are more disturbing details around the room. She can see pipes running along the walls, hanging from some of these sack-like objects that moved and pulsated as if they were alive. Another one of these things gets closer. Even though the device had managed to calm her, something inside of her snapped. And even though she was unable to move and had been unnaturally sedated, her body was in full fight or flight. She goes into a rage and manages to move just enough to resist, but it's not enough. Her resistance is immediately punished, and one of these other beings points something at her that looks kind of like a weapon or a tool. It was this blue beam of light that shot out and hit her straight in the chest, and the pain was excruciating. She described it as if every nerve in her body was on fire, and then she lost consciousness. Perhaps that was them showing her mercy. But when she came to, she was all by herself, her hands on the steering wheel, driving. She was actually on the road heading back toward Apache Junction, and it was in the evening. She felt very strange and had no memory of how she'd gotten from where she was to her car. She wasn't even sure how much time had passed. As soon as she got home, she went to the bathroom, turned on the shower as hot as she could, and stayed under it for hours. And she scrubbed her skin raw, trying to wash away that horrible feeling of those things touching her. Understandably, she was traumatized, and once she went to her bedroom and got into bed, she didn't leave it for days. She didn't even answer her phone. She just tried really hard to convince herself it had been some hallucination or a nightmare. And after about a week or so, she forced herself to get up and return to some semblance of a normal life. At the time, she was in her early 30s and worked at a pet shop in Apache Junction. She went back to work trying to pretend everything was fine, and eventually, she almost convinced herself that she could move on and that there was no way to explain what had happened. But one day, a customer came into the pet shop carrying a small terrarium. Inside was a lizard, nothing weird about it, but the moment Angie saw it, she lost it. She started hyperventilating, backing away from the counter, and ran out of the shop, locking herself in her car. Knowing she was dealing with trauma, she found a therapist who specialized in hypnotic regression. Initially, even under hypnosis, she couldn't talk about what had happened, but over the course of sessions, more and more memories began to surface, and when she finally revealed the full truth, she had been assaulted by a reptilian creature. Her therapy, of course, was met with skepticism. The belief was that Angie must be transferring existing memories onto the strange scenario with reptilian aliens as a way to cope with the trauma. However, as they continued with the sessions, she provided more details about these events to the point where the therapist began to realize that Angie truly believed this had happened exactly as described. The level of detail, consistency, and her genuine terror when she spoke about it all pointed to her reliving a real-life trauma. It took a lot of therapy and time, but she was eventually able to resume something close to a normal life. The only reason you and I know about this story is because she eventually confided in her friend, Phyllis, who later shared the story with her sister, Sherry Hinkle, who shared it with all of us because people need to know these things are happening. Angie's account is terrifying, but on its own, it's an isolated incident. The documented pattern you're here for begins to emerge when you realize what happened 10 years later. In 2010, Sherry came forward with the story involving her own son, Mark. Mark and his good friend Harry had been exploring a cave in the Superstition Mountains when they discovered an iron door built into the rock. Near the door, they explained that they found a metal rod covered in strange glyphs or symbols. Mark decided to take the rod with him, thinking it was an artifact of some kind, and still, as they were leaving, they immediately realized they weren't alone. They kept catching glimpses of something following them, and from what they could see, it was greenish gray, but it stayed just out of clear sight, darting between the rocks. They made it back to their car and drove home safely. But folks, that wasn't the end. Later that evening, Mark was in his bedroom and he heard something outside his window. When he went to see what it was, he recounted that a reptilian creature was standing in his yard and was staring at him. Mark explained that he was terrified as he realized what it was, that its eyes glowed in the darkness and it opened its mouth, making a horrible hissing sound before vanishing into the night. Sherry told Mark flat out that he needed to return the rod wherever her son had found it. Whatever it was, it clearly belonged to these things. Being in possession of this was putting her entire family in danger. Allegedly, she drove back, found the iron door, left the rod where Mark had found it, and that was the end of things. Unfortunately, many people disbelieve eyewitness testimony, especially when the accounts are highly fantastical. But according to George Johnston, the former president of the Superstitious Mountain Museum, more hikers have vanished in this mountain range than in any other mountain range in the entire country. 4 to 5 people either vanish or die every year. The terrain itself is pretty unforgiving. You have drop-offs, extreme heat during the day, freezing temperatures at night, in addition to deadly snakes and mountain lions, to name a few. But some people believe that the people who go missing are victims of the curse of the lost Dutchman's gold mine. While some understand it as a myth, others consider it a death trap. It goes back to the 1800s, and like most legends, it's packed with murder, greed, and betrayal, with just enough truth to keep people coming back. According to the most popular version, there are dozens of them. A Hispanic man named Miguel Peralta is credited with discovering a remarkably rich vein of gold back in the 1840s. Miguel and his family hauled treasure out of the mountains from the mine for years, quietly building up their wealth. But in 1848, everything fell apart. The family was ambushed, and most of them were killed. But nobody knows for certain who did it. There's speculation it was a greedy prospector. Others say it was a renegade Apache, unhappy that the land was being exploited. But whoever killed the family buried all the gold and sealed the mine to keep people away. 2 of the family members survived. One of them shared the mine's location with a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz. This is where the lost Dutchman's gold mine gets its name. Fast forward to the 1870s, Waltz and his partner, Jacob Weiser, went hunting for the mine, determined to locate it and seize the riches. For a while, it appeared as if these two had found it. They worked it in secret, supposedly even pulling out a sizable haul of gold. But like everybody else, they ran into trouble. They had to stash their treasure somewhere before disappearing, and ever since then, the number of disappearances have skyrocketed. In 1931, an amateur explorer named Adolf Ruth headed into the Superstition Mountains with one goal: to find the treasure. Even though he was 66, stubborn and obsessed, he was in good enough shape to tackle this until he vanished completely. 6 months later, his skull was found with 2 bullet holes. And shortly after, far downstream, someone discovered a bottle washed up on the shore of a river, and inside was a handwritten note signed by Adolf Ruth himself. And it read, "I'm sitting under a tree in a creek with a broken leg. I need help quickly. Finder of this note, please give it to Howard Peterson. P.S. Have found the lost Dutchman." When word of this got out, it created an overnight sensation. Headlines exploded, and people started flocking here in pursuit of the treasure. In the mid-1940s, a prospector named James A. Cravey also searched for the mine. His headless body turned up later. In 1945, an author named Barry Storm visited the mountains to research for an upcoming book. He claimed he was being stalked by a mysterious sniper, someone he referred to as Mr. X, while searching for the mine. And if you look more recently, the body count keeps adding up. In 2009, a hiker named Jesse Kappen from Denver, Colorado, just disappeared while treasure hunting in the Tonto National Forest. For 3 years, there was no trace of him, but in 2012, rescuers found his remains stuffed into a crevice. In July of 2010, 3 more hikers vanished while searching for the mine. Their bodies were found 6 months later in January of 2011. So, it could be bad luck, and maybe it's the heat or the wildlife, or maybe there's something hidden in the mountains, something valuable, and something protected by an organization that doesn't want it to be found. And in March of 2000, Angie might have been the one person who came face to face with whatever that is and lived to tell about it. But of course, Angie's reptilians aren't the only strange beings reported in these mountains, because for centuries, long before the Dutchman's legends, the Yavapai people spoke of another group of guardians living inside the rock, beings who sometimes offer gifts and sometimes deliver deadly warnings. They are more commonly known as the Fae, and in fact, there's several accounts that suggest they have something to do with the high strangeness in these mountains. On a hot summer day in 1910, a 19-year-old cowboy had been in his horse saddle since dawn. The young man was working the western edge of the Barkley Ranch, searching for strays in the rough country near the Superstition Mountains. Due to the brutal terrain, sometimes cattle that wander off don't always return. By the early afternoon, the Arizona sun was so punishing that he had to ride his horse up to a specific ridge where he was able to spot cattle that he had seen before. Unfortunately, he's not able to see anything. He decided to rest in the shade of some laurel bushes while the heat of the day passed, and he loosened his horse's girth, took a long drink from his canteen, and rested. Within minutes of relief from the sun, he fell asleep. However, something inside of him told him to wake up and open his eyes, and as he did this, movement caught his eye. He blinked, still half asleep but on a cliff ledge about 30 feet away. He saw what looked like children, maybe 5 or 6 of them, moving along the rocks in single file. He has to double take because something is wrong with what he's looking at. These are not children. They are actually men, just very small. In complete astonishment, Jose slowly sits up, afraid that any sudden movement will make them scatter. And as he looks, he could see that they're focused on something and they're moving along with purpose on the ledge. He could tell they were dressed in rough brown clothing like canvas or hide. Each one of them had a long white beard that reached past their belts, and around each of their heads was something that glinted in the sun, like a band or a circlet. They are 3 feet at their tallest. These small men reach a crack in the cliff face no wider than a man's hand. The leader turned sideways and then disappeared as if he had stepped through solid rock. One by one, the others follow, and they in turn vanish. Jose could not believe what he just witnessed. He's up on his feet now, moving toward the cliff in complete astonishment. Now he knew that from growing up and working in this kind of heat, it can play tricks on your eyes. But at the base of the cliff, a good 40 feet below where they had vanished, the small men reappeared, standing in a perfect line, all looking directly at him. There was no way down from that crack in the rock. It appeared as if they had just teleported there. The leader steps forward, and it's obvious that he is older than the others, and he walks straight toward Jose with these very slow, deliberate steps. And Jose notices that he can't move. Even though part of him wants to run to get on his horse and ride back, he's completely immobilized. He wants to understand what it is he's seeing. The small man stops about 3 feet away, but up close, Jose can see his face is weathered like old leather and his eyes are dark and unblinking. And the band around his head isn't metal like he thought, but something that seems to hold light inside. Without ever speaking, the small man places something in Jose's hand. A rough piece of rock about the size of an egg, far heavier than it looks. This leader nods to Jose, turns, walks back to the others, and in the time it took for him to look down at this stone in his hand and back to these small men, they were gone. The entire way back to the ranch, he continually reached into his pocket to touch the stone and, to make sure it was still there, and then he hadn't just imagined all of this. By the time he got back, it was evening. Jose decided to tell the foreman, a man named Patterson, what had happened, regardless of how believable it sounded. But instead of scoffing or mocking Jose, Patterson takes that rock and holds it up to the sunlight, and he looks at Jose and he asks, "You see this yellow streak running through here?" Jose nodded, and Patterson explained that the ore was of high-grade gold. Patterson was obviously blown away by what Jose had given him, and Jose had explained that this happened in West Boulder Canyon up on the high ridge. The foreman was eager to ride out at first light to see for himself. Now, after the story spread quickly on the ranch, the trip back to West Boulder Canyon was going to be turning into a small little party. Jose and his father decided to tag along. Just as the sun was cresting over the horizon, Jose led them back to the exact spot. Patterson was the first to dismount and began closely studying the ground near the base of the cliff. And after a moment, he quickly called over the others, and he was blown away by what he was looking at in the ground. There, in the dirt, were footprints, dozens of them, actually, but they were very small, roughly 4 inches long, too small for a child's, and the stride length was wrong, too. It was obvious just from looking that these were made by someone very small. They decide to search the area as thoroughly as possible to locate this gold vein, and they look for weeks, exploring every cave, every nook, every cranny, and crevice in the West Boulder Canyon. But unfortunately, not only do they fail to find any gold vein that could have produced Jose's ore, but they also failed to find any sign of these mysterious little men. Some of the ranch hands started calling him Lucky Jose, the man who was given gold by the mountain spirits. Others were convinced he was just crazy and that the heat had got to him. However, he wouldn't be the first person to see little men in the Superstition Mountains, and he wouldn't be the last. Jose Varela's account is one of the most famous to come from the Superstition Mountains, later recorded by Arizona historian Tom Collenborn. For hundreds of years before Jose was even born, the Yavapai people who lived in this region had been telling stories about the beings that inhabit these peaks. They call them the Kakaka. That's kind of fun to say, isn't it?
Even though we tend to think of fairies and little people and elves as being something predominantly from Western Europe, it's really a widespread phenomenon all across the planet. And even in North America, you did have certain indigenous populations that believed in the existence of little people. The Yavapai believed in these little people just like a lot of other tribes did. One of the race of beings that they talked about were the Kakaka, or Akoka, which translates to little or outside people. And they were sometimes thought of as about 3 feet tall with these round heads and no noses. It was said that the Akaka tended to live in the rugged areas of west central Arizona, specifically around what we know as modern-day Phoenix. So this is certainly the right region for them in that area of the Superstition Mountains. And in these places, they would live in homes on the cliffs, sometimes caves or rock shelters on the rocky mountainside. What's interesting about the story involving the reptilians in the Superstition Mountains is that even though it doesn't sound like a traditional fairy encounter, you wouldn't think of reptilians being fairies, a lot of the themes are still there. You've got this race of beings that at least has a base underground, if doesn't live underground. That's something people would say about the fairies, is that they inhabited subterranean spaces. They had the ability to paralyze her, and that's something that you see when you look at fairy folklore around the world. In Western Europe, they might have called it elf shot or the fairy stroke, but the themes were the same, that they could actually paralyze you and freeze you on the ground in the spot where you were. There's also the concerning reproductive angle that's involved in the story with the reptilian beings. Fairies were preoccupied with human beings, possibly for reproduction. That's one of the things that you hear about. One of the reasons why they would kidnap people was because they were a dying race and actually needed human blood to sustain their lineage. And so that's certainly consistent with the themes seen in this story as well. The other thing that's important to remember is that our definitions of what fairies were or little people are have really tended to narrow over the years. And by that I mean we tend to think of these things as very separate from other sort of mythological beasts. But to a lot of our ancestors, they would have sort of put fairies underneath this broader umbrella of supernatural beings that had fairy-like attributes. A strong case can be made that mermaids are basically a variation on fairies. Similarly, even though they're completely the opposite, they're huge, you could say that giants are also sort of a fairy species. So to that extent, the fact that these were reptilian beings that she saw isn't all that out of the realm of possibility. There are some allusions to drakes, to dragons sort of being underneath the fairy umbrella as well. Thinking of the word fairy in the way that we use the word supernatural or paranormal today is probably the best way to sort of conceptualize what's going on there.
According to Yavapai tradition, the figure stood about 1 foot tall, even smaller than what Jose saw, and they have perfectly round heads, and where their noses should be are just holes. They have been here since the beginning of time. They live deep inside the mountains in places where humans can't reach. And usually, it's said they remain invisible, that only medicine men and tribal leaders can communicate with them. They are the ones who teach the shamans their healing songs and show them which plants cure which ailments. But every once in a while, regular people see them too. And when they do, these beings appear and disappear like smoke. One moment they're there, solid as the rocks around them, the next they're gone. The Yavapai even have a saying that goes, "They are like the wind, like air." Interestingly, the Apache tell similar stories, though their little people are fiercer. They speak of wild mountain dwarves who guard certain canyons with tiny poisoned arrows. The Pima, whose name for the Superstition Mountains means the place of superstitions, warned early settlers about malevolent little spirits in those hills. Tom Collenborn collected dozens of similar accounts. Cowboys in the 1890s reported seeing little Indians on remote slopes. Miners reported that tools went missing from their camps, leaving tiny footprints behind. And as recently as the 1970s, hikers reported feeling watched by something low to the ground and hearing laughter where no children could possibly be. The little men Jose saw matched the descriptions from the tribal stories almost perfectly. Even the gift of gold fits the pattern. The Kakaka are known to sometimes reward those who respect their mountains. The Yavapai believe they live under several peaks in Arizona: Granite Mountain, Four Peaks, Red Mountain, and yes, Superstition Mountain, right where Jose had his own encounter. Sometimes they build tiny houses above ground hidden in the rocks, and if you find one, the elders say leave it alone. They don't appreciate visitors, but why did they show themselves to Jose? He was just a young vaquero looking for cattle, and that's probably why. They reveal themselves when they choose to for reasons only they understand. Sometimes it's probably to remind humans that we don't know everything about the world we think we own. Jose Varela lived another 60 years after his encounter in West Boulder Canyon, carrying it with him everywhere he went. Near the end of his life, he would say something interesting. The gold wasn't really the gift. The gift was learning of their existence. And because you guys made it to the end of this episode, I want you to all comment down below, "I'm not superstitious," so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy content like this, where we deep dive into strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural, what are you waiting for? Smack that like and subscribe button right now for more content just like this. As always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.